Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our discussion on the American Civil War. So today we're going to be taking a look at the impact of the Civil War on various groups of people, as well as the post-war look at things. So what's going on after the war? All right, so to begin, let's get into our groups, such as the impact of the war on the African American community, the regular soldiers who did the fighting, as well as what was happening on the home front, like the people back at home while the soldiers are off fighting. All right, so throughout, although slavery is now over, African Americans did not begin to achieve full equality during the next 100 years. We don't get full equality for another 100 years until the 1960s. Now, many African Americans, they seized the opportunity when the Northern Army was coming nearby. A lot would end up running away to the Northern Army because they would protect them and keep them from being put back into slavery. A number would even join in and at least help out around the army camps. Many would join the all-black regiments and troop units that were in existence at the time. We will talk about one of them shortly, as in right now. So the Emancipation Proclamation, as we talked about, is going to allow for the enlistment of African American soldiers into the Union Army. Several 100,000 African Americans are going to enlist during the Civil War, and some are going to even get the chance to see combat. Most were held back to do a lot of the labor-intensive work for the army, such as building defenses, building forts, clearing land for camping, all that type of stuff. But there would be some units, such as the 54th Massachusetts, that would serve in combat with distinction and become, by their own right, very famous in American military history. The 54th Massachusetts is one of my favorite Civil War units to learn about. There is a fantastic movie that was made back in the late 80s called Glory. It stars Matthew Broderick, who you might remember from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It also has Morgan Freeman and Denzel Washington. Denzel Washington actually won an Oscar for his performance in this film for Best Supporting Actor. So, this is a top-notch film. It tells the story of the 54th Massachusetts very, very well. They scraped and fought to get the opportunity to serve the United States as regular soldiers. They wanted to go into combat. They wanted to prove themselves, and they had to prove themselves for anyone to even give them an inkling of respect. And it basically shows the progress of the 54th going from training with this white officer who comes from an abolitionist family. He's an abolitionist. And, when the United States Army is going to pay African American soldiers a lower rate of pay than the white soldiers, not only do the enlisted men, the regular soldiers, they rip up their pay papers and it's like, hey, we want equal fair pay, so we should get that because we're doing the same job. And the white officers, like this guy, the colonel, he rips up his too. He's not going to take any pay unless his guys get the money that they're supposed to get. He pretty much wins over all of his guys, and they follow him to hell and back. It's one of those types of stories, but it's a true story. The film also shows how they get to one of these big major fights where they're trying to attack and take a fort as part of a joint attack on it. And how roughly 45% of the 54th is basically either killed, wounded, or captured during the battle, including the colonel who they all highly respected, getting killed in action. They have a great scene of that in the film. I highly recommend watching that if you want to know more about the 54th. Now, this right here is basically just a little sum up of that story, but it was Colonel Robert Shaw who was in charge. But read this if you want to know a little bit more about how that got wrapped up. But African American soldiers, since the Civil War, very, very highly decorated, highly, highly respected in the history community. All right, moving forward. Now, for the regular soldiers, white or black, doesn't matter. Warfare was brutal. The camp life, you're lonely and you're bored most of the time. A lot of soldiers who got to go home before the war was over were injured in some way, whether they lost a leg, an arm, a hand, an ear. Their face got, severely like brutalized from, fighting. Someone might have gotten a little crispy from a fire. You never know. It typically wasn't good when the wounds happened, because like you get shot in the arm, there's a really reasonable chance you're going to lose that arm, or you get shot in the leg, you're probably going to lose the leg. So yeah, the wounds were horrific. The medical personnel did not have great techniques for how to handle all these wounds because of how like awful they were. Right. A lot of fighting, of course there's the shooting, but a lot of hand-to-hand combat is going on. And you can look in museums, you can just look it up on the internet, diaries and letters that Civil War soldiers wrote home. I've read my fair share of these when I was doing an internship for getting my history degree. Some of it is very hard to stomach when soldiers are writing about the brutality of the combat, but it brings it all home like, wow, this was intense stuff. And it also leads to after the war, when soldiers are going home primarily in the South, they might not be coming home to a home. It might have been burned down during the fighting if fighting happened in that area. And a lot are going to be having to live with permanent disabilities for the rest of their lives. Like, it wasn't uncommon for two guys who knew each other, they each had one leg, they would buy a pair of shoes together. It wasn't an uncommon thing. Right. On the home front, we have the women who have to step up and run the households and everything while the men are off fighting. They're taking all these non-traditional roles for women now. So during the war, women had to manage the homes and families on very little resources. So food shortages, medicine shortages, clothing shortages, all that type of stuff. A lot of poverty and hunger, not only for the soldiers, but also for the people back home, especially in the South. Women had to take on roles in agriculture, nursing, and in the war industries, making the weapons and the ammunition for the soldiers. That's a trend that we're going to start seeing in world history, basically from this point in time, the mid 1800s on through to the present, where women are a part of these industries. And especially when there's a war going on, the men, at least up until recent years, were the only ones going to fight, or at least the vast majority of the ones going to fight, like 95 to 99%, unless you're in a country that had no choice but to enlist both men and women, like Russia during World War II. So yeah, so all those factory jobs are empty. They had to fill them, so the women stepped up and they did the jobs that needed to be done. Now, let's look at the post-war contributions. So after the war, what these men did to try and help, bring peace back and brotherhood between the North and the South. So Ulysses S. Grant. Now, he is going to try and urge radical Republicans not to be harsh with how they treat the former Confederacy. He is going to be elected president and is going to be president during the majority of the Reconstruction era, where the North is attempting to help the South rebuild, after the destruction of the Civil War. He's going to push for the rights of the newly freed slaves, which are called freedmen, and is also going to stand against punishing the South because, like, we're all Americans. We don't punish each other this way. Like, it's not like we fought against a foreign nation. Now, Robert E. Lee, he is going to do basically the same work in the South as Grant is doing in the North. Lee is going to push for the South to basically move past how the war resulted and openly join the United States again. He is going to serve as president of Washington College, which would later be renamed Washington and Lee University. And this goes along with his message of putting an emphasis on education to better the nation's future. All right. Last one we're talking about is Frederick Douglass. This guy, he was a big drive in getting a lot of stuff done for the African American community. Full equality for African Americans is what he pushed for, like getting citizenship with the 14th Amendment. The 15th Amendment he helped push as well, which was the right for African American men to be able to vote. He's going to push for more action by the government to protect the newly freed slaves that are living in the South. And also, he's going to serve as ambassador to Haiti and is going to work in the civil service, like bureaucracy of the government. So he goes from a runaway slave to being an ambassador for the United States in a foreign country. Like, he serves as like a perfect example of what people can achieve when they have the right drive in life to better their life circumstances. So he's definitely a person to look up to for anybody. All right, so that is where we're going to leave off, and when we come back next time, we will be wrapping up our discussion on the Civil War.